Yesterday you were a gardener. This morning, men you'd never met pulled you out of the field, washed you, poured oil over your skin, and put a robe on your back worth more than everything you have ever owned. They set a crown on your head. They sat a girl beside you and called her your queen. And then, one by one, they knelt. Right now, in this room, you are the king. Everyone here is bowing to you. Everyone here is also completely aware that you are a gardener. And nobody finds that strange because everyone in this room knows the one thing about you that actually matters. In 100 days, being king is going to get you killed. That is not the risk of the job. That is the job. You weren't chosen to rule. You were chosen to die, on schedule, wearing that crown, so that the man who used to wear it doesn't have to. To understand how a civilization ends up doing this, deliberately, formally, with paperwork, you have to understand what a Mesopotamian court did when the sky handed the king a death sentence. Start with the sky, because that's where the death sentence came from. Mesopotamian scholars watched the heavens the way a modern intelligence agency watches enemy communications. Centuries of observations recorded on clay tablets, filed and cross-referenced by temple scribes, and in that system, one event outranked everything else. An eclipse. An eclipse wasn't a light show. It was a verdict, specifically a verdict on the king, an omen that the gods had decreed the ruler's death. But here's where it stops being superstition and starts being something closer to law, because the omen system had rules, jurisdiction even. In the fully developed version of this system, the moon's disk was divided into 4 quadrants, each mapped to one region of the known world: west, east, north, south. Which quadrant went dark told you which king was doomed. An eclipse over the wrong quarter of the moon was somebody else's problem. There was even an escape clause. If Jupiter was visible in the sky during the eclipse, the king was safe. Case dismissed. And because these astronomers were genuinely good enough eventually to predict eclipses before they happened, the court often knew the death sentence was coming in advance. Which raises the obvious question. If you know fate is coming for the king on a schedule, what do you actually do about it? Your first instinct is probably hide him. Get the king out of the palace. Wait it out. That's not how they saw it, and the reason why is the key to this entire story. The doom decreed by an eclipse wasn't aimed at a man. It was aimed at an office. Whoever was legally, ritually, officially the king when fate arrived, that's who fate would take. Hiding didn't work because the danger wasn't attached to the king's body. It was attached to his title, but that logic cuts both ways. If fate targets the title and not the man, then the title can be moved. So that's exactly what they did. They found a loophole in destiny itself. Rather than trying to prevent the prophecy, which was impossible, they arranged for it to come true. Precisely formally on schedule, just to the wrong man. The procedure had a name, the substitute king. In Akkadian, Shar-Puhi. The fullest records of how it worked come from Assyria, roughly 1,000 years after that gardener in Eson, which tells you something on its own. This wasn't one city's strange experiment. It was a practice durable enough to outlive every dynasty that used it, and by the time of the Assyrian Empire, we have the actual paperwork. It worked like this. When a dangerous eclipse was identified, the chief exorcist began searching for a candidate. He wasn't looking for a nobleman, and he definitely wasn't looking for a volunteer. The ideal substitute was a condemned criminal, a prisoner of war, or a low-status laborer. In plain terms, someone whose death wouldn't cause trouble. The chosen man was brought to the palace, washed, anointed, dressed in the king's own robes, decorated with the royal jewels, crowned with the royal diadem, and enthroned. A girl was selected and seated beside him as his queen. This wasn't theater. The substitute held court, a real one, possibly a third to half the size of the true king's. Officials attended him. The rituals of kingship were performed around him. For up to 100 days, this man was the king in every way the gods could be expected to notice. And the real king, he withdrew from public life and waited. In official correspondence written during the ritual, he wasn't referred to as the king at all, because officially, right now, he wasn't one. The letters call him the farmer. You can probably see where this is going for the substitute. When the danger period ended, the prophecy had to be satisfied. The omen said the king would die. So the king died. The one wearing the crown. The substitute was executed, and the records suggest he was given royal burial honors, because whatever else he was, he had died as a king. Then the farmer walked back into the palace, put the crown back on, and resumed ruling as if nothing had happened. We know at least one of these men by name. During the reign of the Assyrian king Esarhaddon, A young man called Damki was enthroned as a substitute and then killed, along with the girl who had been made his queen, to absorb an omen threatening the crown prince. One documented king performed this ritual 5 times in roughly 13 years. Some historians suspect his own scholars encouraged that the men who read the omens realized the ritual gave them a lever over the throne itself, since every performance meant the king withdrew and power flowed through them. If that's true, the machine built to protect the king had quietly started operating him. Which brings us back to that gardener, the one you were at the start of all this, sitting on a borrowed throne, waiting to die. He was real, and we know his name, Enlil-bani. The king who pulled him out of the garden and put him on the throne was Era-imiti, ruler of Isin, who, facing an evil omen, did everything by the book, enthroned his substitute, placed the tiara on his head, withdrew from the palace to wait out the danger in safety. And then, while the ritual was still running, Era-imiti died anyway, in hiding, according to the Chronicle, while sipping a bowl of hot broth. And that created a problem nobody had planned for. The prophecy was fulfilled. A king was dead. But the throne wasn't empty. It had a fully, legally, ritually enthroned king already sitting on it. Enlil-bani simply refused to get up. And it worked. The gardener ruled Isin for the next 24 years, and not as some usurper clinging on. The royal lists count him as a real king, and his inscriptions celebrate him like any other. By the ritual's own logic, there was nothing to object to. Fate had come for the king, exactly as foretold. The system functioned perfectly. It just never specified which king. Now, the honest part. That story survives in a chronicle written more than 1,000 years after the events. Both kings were real. The records confirm Era-imiti ruled Isin, and Enlil-bani ruled after him. But the substitute story itself may be a legend, invented later to explain why the throne of Isin suddenly jumped from one family to another. So there are 2 ways to read this. Maybe the ritual really did work exactly as designed, and the timing was pure, absurd coincidence. Or a gardener pulled off one of the most audacious coups in Bronze Age history. And the cover story he left behind was so good, we're still repeating it 4,000 years later. The historians can't rule out either one. The people who built this ritual could predict an eclipse years in advance. They ran archives, courts, and contracts, and when their own system told them the king was doomed, they didn't reject the verdict, and they didn't accept it either. They read the fine print. Fate said the king must die. It never said which one. So they appointed a man to the job, paid destiny in full, and filed the paperwork. And once in a city called Isin, the paperwork got away from them. So either fate has a sense of humor, or a gardener spotted the single flaw in the most sacred ritual his civilization had, and used it to walk off with a throne. 4,000 years later, the tablet still won't say which. It just says he sat down, and he never got up.